Hello, everybody, and today I wish to talk to you about the 2020 news, and this is specifically in terms of big tech or big media, which is getting ever so involved in the everyday lives. Now, this comes in the form of YouTube, in which they are deciding that they are going to ban any content that discusses about election fraud for the 2020 election. However, the 2016 election, when they say that Russia helped steal the election for Trump, that's still okay. That's still on board. And in this regard, the area that I want to specifically focus on is everything that pertains to YouTube, but not just YouTube specifically, but also, well, where we're going as a country as a whole. So when we look at YouTube specifically, the issue that comes is, again, they're saying that people on the right cannot claim that election fraud is happening. And they're the only people that are saying that election fraud is happening in the 2020 election, and that is fair. YouTube says the reason why they're doing this is because Biden is the president-elect due to all these states certifying their election results, even though it's not till the 14th that the electors vote. So YouTube is deciding the outcome of the election. We still only have president-projected Biden. We do not have president-elect Biden. Even then, we do not have President Biden. But whatever, that is fine. The issue that comes here is if you discuss, for example, any court cases that may be going on, any legal disputes, that is an issue that will go against the people that have made the video, and then their video will get taken down, and that will stunt their growth. So, you know what? Let's play by their game. There is no election fraud for the 2020 election. It is a completely fair and unbiased election, and Joe Biden won completely legitimately. However, what I would recommend for your own reading, not because it's related to election fraud, and there is no such thing as election fraud, is specifically the Texas lawsuit against Wisconsin, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Again, this isn't related to election fraud, and you know what? I'm happy to have Joe Biden as my president. But I would recommend to take some time and go on something like DuckDuckGo and just type in the Texas lawsuit against swing states. They just happen to be swing states, right? It doesn't mean anything in terms of the election. Super interesting read. I can't comment anything about it because I haven't done enough research. And again, nothing about election fraud. Anyways, going back to YouTube, is they seem to have this issue with allowing people to make comments on their platform. Now, usually within any business, I believe all businesses should have the right to decide what they want to do within their own party, within their own entity. We live in a society where you're able to go around and you're able to shop around for different things that you personally want. So if you believe, let's take two different bakeries, for example. One is pro-gay marriage and one's not, right? They won't make a cake for a gay couple. Then you can decide, hey, I don't like that, I'm gonna go to the pro-gay marriage bakery. And then you're able to vote with your money. People can shut down a business because if you think of it as unethical, then yeah, you just decide not to go there, and that's completely fair and fine. The issue that comes here is that YouTube is basically a monopoly. Yes, there are other routes that you could go through, but they are not as popular, and many people are not able to reach a wider range of audience. You need an audience to then get advertisements and then to be able to grow as a brand. So the issue comes that a lot of people are forced onto YouTube. It is a monopoly in every sense of the word. Even though they don't completely own the field, they really do. And the issue comes if YouTube decides what speech is limited and not limited, well, you're kind of out of luck. So when people bring up the topic of we should allow the First Amendment and all amendments on to be applied to companies, typically I would disagree. I do not think that a company should be limited in any way, shape, or form. But when it comes to monopolies, and this is where you typically see a lot of conservatives agree here, is that monopolies should be broken up in the very least, what we saw with like Rockefeller, for example. And what we're seeing currently in terms of Facebook is they're getting broken up because it's viewed as illegal. They hold a monopoly in the spaces that Facebook's in. So the same thing should be applied to YouTube. YouTube should either say, hey, you're going to have to break up, and YouTube in terms of Google as a whole, but again, we're focusing on YouTube. Either you're going to have to break up and change how everything is ran, or you have to follow the Constitution. And there's a lot more law that comes into this depending on what country you're in, because YouTube doesn't just service North America, specifically the United States, but again, if you want to be and owned in the United States and operate here, you should fall underneath those rules. In either case, though, YouTube has decided to take this stance, a very active stance against, well, the election of 2020. They wish to have a undisputed winner and that everything else will be brushed under the rug. And what does that mean for the future? Well, we live in quite the scary time. We live in a period of time where we are going out of capitalism, which has seen the greatest country in the world rise up in the United States and bring about the most prosperity. And in return, what we are getting is a corporate capitalism now, in which a lot of the people on the left, which are going to say, hey, you know what, I hate corporate capitalism. Fuck these big businesses, and sorry for swearing, but that's their viewpoints. And something I would agree with them as well. As much as big business is important to have, it's also important to have your mom and pop shops. Well, the main issue comes from this is when they say, hey, I don't like you, Facebook, YouTube, but, you know, you help support my political ideology. They kind of then ignore it. It's really a hypocritical stance. Now we're entering a term or an era of corporate capitalism where you're going to have these big companies decide our lives. YouTube decides what is or isn't speak. 1984 is a good point on this. They get to decide how you speak, what you can say, and really limit it. And it controls the narrative. And that's what we're seeing nowadays too, in general, is you're not allowed to say, hey, I think that the 2020 election was stolen. The 2016, completely fine and fair, because it supports the Democrat agenda. But the 2020, well, that supports the Trump agenda. We can't have that. And this is just a minor point on a grand spectrum of it all, right? Twitter was consistently calling the election, even though, well, and I guess it is called now at this point, we have Joe Biden as our president, even though people were saying, hey, look, this is a little bit suspicious. Again, I'm not saying that the election, this is for you, YouTube, is any bit fraudulent because Joe Biden is president-elect. In either scenario, though, what we come down to is we have a lot of these questions filling people's mind, and it's for good reason because we see big tech getting ever bigger and encroaching into our lives. I believe the federal government shouldn't be involved in my life because I don't want a big corporation deciding my life. Well, not just a big corporation, sorry, that's a bit of a Freudian slip, but in terms of big government. And the same applies to big corporations, though. I don't want them in my life. I don't want them to decide what I can and can't say, or else then that negatively reacts onto me. I get banned off of the only platforms, frankly, that you can speak on. A lot of people are getting banned off of YouTube, like such as Crowder is getting a bunch of copy strikes for the things that he says, and he has to play a very political game and maneuver in that space. Alex Jones has been banned off of YouTube and Twitter, and he has to play in a very tight space. And the issue comes that if these voices, whether or not you agree with them, are silenced, then you're going to have no chance to have a real conversation. You live in an echo chamber where only one voice is heard and one voice only. And that's unhealthy. Same thing for the people on the right as well. People that are conservative should listen to liberal ideologies, or people in the center as well. I like to listen to Dave Rubin, who is someone that's more of a centrist, a liberal, right? Who is not a socialist, a progressive, or a far conservative, because he gives a different viewpoint. It is also good to listen to these talk show hosts at night because they bring a different perspective, right? Jimmy Kimmel, John Oliver, Don Lemon, all these different people, broadcast journalists or just commentators in general, they bring a new perspective. Reading these different sites and even looking at people such as BuzzFeed, it's good to know your opposition because you should be able to change your view. It's important to have those dialogues open. But what we're seeing with YouTube and all these big companies, and this is including Amazon, YouTube, which means Google, Facebook, is they don't want that. They want to limit your avenues so that way you're in an echo chamber and anyone that doesn't agree is evil, and they get to set the narrative and they get to control everything. It's quite the scary time that we're living in. And it's terrifying to know that as we go forward, this is where our country is headed. All I can say is for the people that are watching is look at other routes available. Now, I know there are some routes that are not completely viable yet, but you do have stuff such as Parler in comparison to Twitter, which would be a great avenue to go down because it gives you the opportunity, in the very least, to have a opposition to Twitter. And then when it comes to YouTube in that sphere, you have Rumble that you can go towards, or BitChute, in which you can upload videos and again have a conversation. Maybe right now they're not the best alternatives, but they can be through continuous support. Right now they do have a very specific demographic to them, but that can change with more and more people being involved. And the same thing can be applied to Reddit, Facebook, and all these other companies. Look at the competitors. Vote with your time and your money. Don't just go to the status quo. Don't just use Google. You have DuckDuckGo, for example, that you can go on, or Bing. So, as I bring this to a close, it's quite worrisome where we're going as a country in the future. We are a country that's incredibly divided, and our thoughts are being controlled. Hopefully 1984 doesn't end up becoming a reality within America, even though it's becoming a reality all across the world. But in either case, thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please leave a like and do subscribe. And anyways, God bless America.